Welcome, everyone. I hope a number of you were able to see that amazing presentation by Nithya Ramanathan. What she really shared with us is the need to start thinking in terms of data webs and adding value through whatever work we're doing using data. I think our next presenter, still in the data realm, but with a very different story, because the real question is, how do we skill up people to be prepared for this new data world? And Jean Guo brings a special story there. So let's have Jean on stage, if she's ready. There you are,
Hi,
Jean.
everyone.
How are you?
I'm great. How are you, Tom?
Good. I'm looking forward to hearing a little bit more about your story, Jean. You and I have interacted a bit, and I've learned about the extraordinary things that Konexio is doing. Just to give everyone else a picture, Jean Guo is of, I think, many different cultures. She can explain that when she starts, just so we all know where she's from, but she's from many places. She's currently running a social startup in France that promotes social economic inclusion of vulnerable populations. This includes refugees, migrants, and how she gets in their hands the training and digital skills they need. She's a recent Rubenstein Fellow at the Harvard Center for Public Leadership, and she founded Konexio on the findings of her research on migrant populations as a part of her Fulbright Fellowship at the Paris School of Economics. She's been the recipient of numerous awards, including Fulbright for the Fulbright Future Prize, Forbes 30 Under 30, in the category of social entrepreneur, and she has been shown in many magazines and videos. But we get to have her here today with us. And I really am interested in how things are going in the development of your company, Jean, because, it is technically a startup, but your startup has become very big. So floor is over to you, and welcome.
Thank you, Tom, and thank you for that very, very kind introduction. I'm happy to be here today presenting the work of Konexio, and also, as we move forward in the next decades, certainly we've all seen what's happening in the situation in Ukraine. We know that there's going to be increasing challenges when we talk about displaced persons in the world, and what we can do really in terms of sustainable solutions, especially talking about livelihoods when we work with some of the big aid institutions in the world. So maybe to start off, I'd love to, go through a quick presentation to present, kind of the main challenges we have today, what the work of Konexio is in that, and then also maybe potential, solutions, potential synergies that can be developed. And obviously, I'm very happy also to exchange afterwards and answer any questions. So maybe to start off with, in the next slide here, what are the big challenges when we talk about digital divide today? We know that, for us at Konexio, our mission is to think about bridging digital divide for societies most vulnerable through our programs. But we know that in some of the most resource-constrained environments, we're talking about 82.4 million displaced persons globally. That is going to increasingly grow, unfortunately, this number in the next few years. 84% of them are located in developing countries. We know that also refugees actively seek work as a key step to self-reliance, but there are huge structural barriers that they face, including poor economic conditions, a lack of access to the digital economy. On the other hand, we know increasingly also with the COVID crisis that we've really had this huge shift towards digital that's been felt all over the world. We know that there will be an estimated 50 million jobs related to the development of new technologies by 2030, and that when we talk about different online markets, the online freelance market alone has grown by 50% in the last few years. And so now for us is an especially critical moment to reverse the tide of COVID cost inequalities, which has only catalyzed the need for online access and digital skills as the world has shifted towards this more remote work trend. We know that vulnerable populations around the globe do not have access to some of these basic services, but neither do they also have access to really build for their future in terms of building sustainable livelihoods. So on the next slide here, we see that, there are huge barriers specifically, as I previously referred to, regarding, the situation and the constraints with certain refugee populations today. One, unfortunately, is that they lack the right to work in a lot of the resource-constrained environments where they are. And in addition to that, there are high barriers to employment opportunities, given the status that they have in certain regions of the world. On the next slide, we present a little bit of the work and what we see in terms of our job in connecting our students in terms of the status quo today, what they have, and what we can do to really connect them. Unfortunately, today, the status quo is that the profile of our beneficiaries are that they start out with no worker protections. They have reliance on, cash assistance or irregular forms of assistance, and they compete for scarce local work. What we want to create is an opportunity where they are able to benefit from, the online digital economy with freelance work, so that they have, on all these fronts that I just listed, increasing rights, increasing economic opportunity. On the next slide here, we want to see also, what we see in terms of the trends on online freelance work. We see that this will continue to grow continuously with an estimated 56 million online freelancers. We know that there are also a lot of different types of resources being, projected regarding the annual contributions of refugees to the global economy. So we want to see, at the same time, the status quo of what is not working, the constraints that are faced by a lot of our students, and what we see as huge opportunity for them to be included in this new digital era when we talk about global skills, digital skills, and the right to work with the digital economy. And so, kind of setting up the context here on the next slide, our work is to think about how, our vision is to create this more inclusive society in which no one is left behind, marginalized due to access to digital skills, and how, our mission at Konexio to prepare some of the world's most vulnerable for these jobs of the future really kind of puts the challenges that we've had, but also in light of the opportunities where they can, if given the right access to training, the right access to the network of opportunities available in the digital economy, be included, especially as we think about the tendencies and the rapid digitalization of society. So kind of on the next slide here, and I'll be happy to dig a little bit more deeper into the work today, but to give kind of an overall context to Konexio and where we're at in terms of our impact footprint. We have nearly 3,000 students trained. That is about 300 cohorts and more than 200,000 hours of work delivered. We currently work in 4 countries today, that being France, where we started our work initially, to Malawi, Kenya, and Jordan, where we've expanded with global partners, including the United Nations and specifically UNHCR, the UN Refugee Agency. And we have about over 40 project sites in which we operate directly. And amongst some of the key impact indicators we look at for our students are, where they are 6 months post-program. We are at a rate about exactly 72% who've either gone towards the labor market, who've enrolled in other degree-seeking programs, or those who've actually become entrepreneurs 6 months post-program and post-training. And on the next slide here, we're going to kind of start and do a global zoom on our international programs, those that we've developed closely in partnership and the specific model we've built with our partners around the world. So, as we kind of mentioned, the business case that we want to build here is we see the current situation being that there's an met, on one hand, employer demand for remote workers and digitally skilled labor. And what we want to see in the Konexio ideal situation is us being the bridge that trains a supply of motivated people who've not yet even been brought into this employment sphere, and giving them the opportunity to meet the current market demands. And so specifically, how does Konexio do that? On the next slide, we work with corporate, nonprofit, and institutional partners to implement our digital inclusion program, so digital freelancing training that we have, and we connect students directly with jobs. Here we've listed some of the partners in addition to UNHCR with whom we work around the world. For example, JRS, who works specifically with refugees in nearly 50 countries, refugee, for example, who work specifically with women and girls, and Friendship France, who work in regions in Asia as well. What we want to do with some of these global partnerships is allow us, through a train-the-trainer model, which I will explain shortly, to scale up our solution quickly and empower our partners locally on the ground to deploy our programs. On the next slide, we present a little bit specifically these steps of implementation of our model. So what we work to do is to really support our implementation partners in doing an initial setup of our specific training programs. We go through a specific training of trainers for a certain period of time, really building capacity on the ground up to the last level so that they are able to run the program independently. For us, the objective is to be able to really work with local partners up to setup, giving them the technological tools, the pedagogical tools to support them. And on the other hand, for us, collecting a lot of data points on how the trainings are going, what are the new skills we should develop as we think about the different digital skills and their evolution over time, given that it is a rapidly evolving network. And then for us, we also work to supply our students and connections to, whether that's freelance platforms like Upwork, where we've negotiated specific partnership to specific companies that seek out specific missions for our students. And so our work is to kind of bridge this connection with the platforms or directly with companies, and also continue to reinvest, understand the data behind the programs to continuously improve them. Just a few quick, notes on our value add on this next slide. Something that might be a little different regarding our value proposition is that we really work with some of the most vulnerable students. We know that we've looked at learning solutions today where it requires a certain level of perhaps advanced digital literacy, digital autonomy, and we want to really focus on bringing the most vulnerable online because we see that there's a huge need there. There are not enough solutions kind of on that end of the kind of digital skill scale, and we want to be there to help bring our students online and be able to benefit from other support services. Second, we really want to continue honing in on the scalable train-the-trainer model that we have with other partners on the ground. We have, in addition to the partners I've just named, other partners we've been discussing in the pipeline outside of the African regions, the MENA region, as well as Latin America, where we continue to want to build and refine our model and work to empower locally the students on the ground. And then finally, this very direct connection to the digital economy, to the online working economy, in the sense that we work with a huge array of different global partners, humanitarian partners on the ground. One of the things that we see is that there are increasing calls for focusing on self-reliance, focusing on sustainability livelihoods, as some of the student groups we work with, they've been in the camp on average 12, 13, up to 15 years without maybe they have access to other basic services, but without direct access to work immediately. And so we want to be one of the actors that can provide that bridge, that solution, taking into account that, the freelance, the online gig economy are one of the options, especially when there are these constraints to right to work, to readily available economic opportunity locally. On the next slide, we just wanted to cover, some of our current roadmap and where we hope to go. Specifically, we have a goal by 2025 to really work globally around the world, either directly that we do in some sites, and then also via our partners in the network to have up to 15,000 students trained annually per year across over more than 6 different country sites. We also hope to increase our impact of other organizations and train up to 50 other organizations in the next 5 years, which will have a much greater multiplier effect on the ground of local organizations who are empowered to bridge the digital skills and opportunity gap. On the next slide here, we present some of the strategic objectives as we move forward to become this go-to capacity builder for other NGOs. On the next slide here, we talk about some of the other strategic initiatives and objectives we have. We also want to see ourselves as we move forward as a connecting hub between organizations to think about how we can mutualize shared value partnerships, what we can bring to the table, combined with the partners' knowledge of the local, cultural context on the ground, as well as the operational muscle that they bring. We also want to contribute to the development of the tech ecosystem in the Global South. There's a huge opportunity. We see a lot of, rapidly changing technologies that we can build and take advantage of. And then also, how do we bring and uplift a whole new generation of talent into the ecosystem and continue, to build our network of partnerships. On the next slide here, we want to get into a quick just example of one of the programs we launched recently with JRS, our partner on the ground in the Dzaleka refugee camp of Malawi, just to provide specific context and details of one partnership that has been successful and is continued to be renewed. On the next slide here, we talk about, here are just some photos of the students, including them at the graduation ceremony. On the next slide. And then just some key details regarding the program, the project site, which is in the Dzaleka refugee camp. The average length of stay there was 12 years when we started working there, and is now increased to 15 years. Our target beneficiaries, there was a certain age in terms of students being at least 18 plus, having basic language proficiency, but otherwise we really wanted to open it up to individuals with no prerequisites in terms of their digital skills. And the first time frame, here as we move to the next slide, gives a breakdown of, what the key phases of our training were. Our goals was to equip our local partner on the ground, on a first instance, to have the skills and, the methodology with our programs. In a second instance, to really help directly them deliver the last mile training solutions and accompany the students through the programs. On the next slide here, we go through some of the key steps of our programs, which range from the setup, working to train the students, having our graduates finish and starting to develop their portfolios on different freelance platforms, to really focus on the next stages of our program. On the next slide, we go through, the different phases that we have here regarding our, training, of students. We have some of obviously the post-program in more detail. The training we usually break down into 2 phases. They have a classroom phase initially for the first 3 months, and then the next 3 months is very much a practicum phase, where the objective is for us to work with them to help them, when they have their portfolios validated, how do they interact with potential clients on the platform? How do they, continue to gain experience in specialized skills, as we see, them starting to do after a certain period of experience, and any barriers that they might have. We had students who, because of various reasons, had their accounts not validated, and so we work with the UN agency to provide, valid, government IDs that were needed to, validate their profile. And then finally, when we get to the post-program phase, is really letting them continue to earn income and, following their path to progress and financial independence. We also started, as we noted in the program, to have our students try and buy back their computers, really working on the sustainability of the program itself. On the next slide here, so just are some of the key results. In the very first pilot iteration of the program, we were at about an 80% graduate rate. What was really great with the program is we had 100% of the graduates employed. So that means all of them were able to start earning income directly via the platforms or direct companies that we put them in touch with, which resulted in about a 500 monthly average income when we had an external party come and do a impact assessment on the ground. And not only that, we also look at some of the other bigger indicators, including improved quality of life through earned income opportunity, starting to gain their first economic opportunities, with 81% of students reporting improved quality of life. On the next slide here, we wanted just to have a quick, visual success story, and one of our students, Geizi, talk about her participation in the program. So if the team can maybe share the quick video snippet that we have prepared here.
I saw people talking about the digital inclusion program, saying how I could make my own money and become my own boss. I was like, oh, I love that. I joined. I think it's important everyone has education to make use of their lives. In the digital inclusion program, I went deep in Excel, Word, or those Microsoft Office tools. I also learned communication skills, management skills, and the translation skills. It was invented by... That same day I finished. That same day I got a job.
So that's one of our students who successfully completed the program. One of our other students on the next slide here is Stan, and he actually has a different role now because he actually went on to become an assistant trainer for future cohorts. For him, he actually was able to really be able to go a lot farther with that. He bought a house, he got married. So there was a lot of things, not only with this gained economic independence for our students, which is really important, but they're also able to continue to build their lives, support a family, build community, lift up their communities. On the next slide here, we have some more testimonials from our students, including our local coordinator and other students. One of the models we've also really worked to develop is to get some of our former students to come back, especially with those who gain a certain amount of experience, being able to work on the platforms, to come back as assistant trainers and kind of share the best practices, the knowledge transfer that they've gained from working and gaining that experience with future cohorts. And on the last slide, kind of to close out, we looking forward have different projects that we're launching, especially in the next few months, especially in Nairobi and Amman, with different various partners and different target populations. For example, one of our projects in Kenya is specifically focused on women and girls, given we know that also sometimes they might not have as much or have the same level of access to certain resources, including economic opportunities, and especially want to focus on the digital aspect for them. And so that's one of the programs we launched in April. And then in Jordan, we work with a mix of local youth, given that it has one of the largest populations of employed youth, as well as refugees in terms of the student group. And finally, on the next slide here, we have potential call to action to kind of end this presentation. We see as we move forward towards the future in terms of the big digital skills, on one hand, yes, it is one of the most powerful levers in terms of employability and getting students to be economically independent for the future. But we also see that it comes across in so many aspects of life. For example, we do have a local partnership in France with one of the large postal banks, given that they help to support a lot of the refugee population in opening accounts. And we see that there's a level of financial inclusion that is very important. So some potential, propositions in terms of a call to action is if there is potential need on the ground, if we can work to maybe co-create a certain pilot program in terms of the knowledge that we can bring on the ground in a certain region, we're happy to do that with a local partner. We also work, as I mentioned, with our partnership with the Postal Bank to really disseminate our workshops, especially when we talk about financial digital inclusion as more and more, of these steps, whether it's, the bank accounts, whether there's multiple other kind of basic necessities in life are moving online, and making sure that everyone is included in that sense. And then finally, even, working with us to accelerate our journey to scale as we're trying to bring on new programs in the next few months and years to come. So thank you so much for listening to my presentation. I would be happy to answer any questions that you have on the program and continue to exchange.
Jean, what a remarkable story. And how long have you been going now, just to get your total time as an entrepreneur with Konexio?
So Konexio was first launched in 2016, but we've really accelerated activity since mid-2018.
Right in the middle of the pandemic. Remarkable again. I'd like to, you really gave us a very thorough sense of what you're doing. It was comprehensive, it was clear. I'd like to know a little bit more about you as a leader. What really drives you to make this work? Can you give a little bit of your background and a little bit of what you feel has been keeping you going through what can only be really big challenges as you go from step to step in the growth of your business?
Yeah, I think for me, it was not part of my original plan to be an entrepreneur. I think I had wanted to actually become an academic. That was part of my original research topic when I got the Fulbright fellowship to work at the Paris School of Economics. But I think it was really the challenge that captivated me. And maybe I'm the type of entrepreneur who found a problem that was so important in the world that I wanted to solve, and maybe not seeing enough solutions on the ground that I wanted kind of to jump in head first and just try and figure out how to, combat this. And so I think that's part of this driving, kind of motivation, and maybe a more personal story as, being the child of immigrants myself. You see that in an increasingly globalized world, there's just so many different kind of issues with regard to being able to access and have the same opportunity. And so I think there's something at Konexio about trying to connect the world literally through our programs, connecting with different cultures, but trying to uplift those who might not have had the same chance. And so we want to do it in maybe a different way than a lot of our partners with whom we work, very well on the ground, to not maybe target that first level of basic necessities, but trying to think about how do we build on self-reliance, sustainability, the livelihoods aspect, which we see as super important, and having a specific, anchor in our expertise in digital and tech skills.
Marvelous. I really think that you're onto something. And the fact that you come from a family that themselves have been migrants, I mean, it gives you a very deep sense and understanding of what that struggle and what that challenge is to go through. One of our participants, Martin Roner, is asking a question. He said, a fascinating value proposition. Thank you for your presentation. How do students find their first job after graduation? What's the biggest challenge for them once they have graduated?
Yeah, so I think some of these things we're also continuing to work with our partners on the ground to continue to adapt those solutions. But generally, what we want to do in the 3-month apprenticeship phase of the program is that we want them to simulate and actually get, some of their first online missions and jobs. And so, for example, we have this specific partnership with Upwork, where there's small things, but they can still be barriers to entry. For example, you have a certain number of connects per month that are free. And after that, that, you have to pay 10 cents, and, a very small amount. But for our students who started with no kind of money in the bank, it was not possible. And so we were able to get Upwork to work with us to eliminate some of those barriers to entry so that they could apply to more jobs and be able to get them. And, at a certain point, be able to pay to bid, 10 cents for each future job. But there were little things like that. So we really relied kind of on the platforms themselves. And when we designed the programs, kind of a lot of theory behind how we want to make sure the programs are most operational and not just theoretical is we took actual case studies, a representative sample of about 100 to 120 exact missions or job offers posted on platforms that range from market research to translations, transcription, data analysis, and we actually integrated that into the curriculum. So our students were not unused to seeing some of these exercises for their first time. A lot of the things we try to do is also focus on the mix between digital and soft skills, learning how to negotiate with a client, learning to identify potential scams, which did happen when they were trying to get onto the platforms. Those are the steps that we try to accompany them on. And I would say one of the biggest challenges for them afterwards is to continue and not drop it in kind of, because when you build up a profile, you need to also continue to, showcase testimonials, showcase, it's kind of a rolling snowball. And so we try to encourage students to not drop that motivation and continue to, bid for jobs, continue to get them. And so I think that's one of the most important factors, that there is no kind of break after they've graduated, that they continue on. And I have the pick stat. We actually have over half of the students who are able to buy back their computers through the program. And so that shows that they've earned enough income, to be able to purchase the computers and continue to use them. So I think we also want to encourage them, even if the program is completely free, when we launch it, we want to encourage them to be able to have other means. And for example, computer buyback can also go towards training fees for future cohorts.
We have another question. Thank you. And I also really like the thought that people can buy back their technology. I mean, that gives some sustainability to what they're doing, and really they need the tech to continue, don't they? So that's an important one. Mirella Pigmesi has said thank you. It was very clear and helpful. I see the countries you've been organizing the program in. English speaking. Do you work in French speaking countries?
Yes, so I think we definitely, with Malawi, which is actually an interesting case, and the choice of one of the first sites that we had was, it had an interesting mix between that it isn't an Anglophone country, but actually it is, not known, the biggest Francophone refugee camp in Africa. And so there were a lot of the students who came from the Democratic Republic of the Congo, amongst other countries, who settled in the Jamaica camp. And so that was kind of this interesting mix of the English and French speaking. And we have current discussions usually with kind of the Francophone speaking countries in Africa currently to develop our program. So yes, we want to make this, and as we kind of expand and grow, we had actually submitted a bid for a first project in Latin America that we'd be able to also have this available in multiple languages. What we want to avoid is making sure that we have clear programs that are adapted to the local context. And so that's one part of our solution. And the other, I think, is really to be able to not let language or any other thing be a barrier to us and be able to help others locally on the ground.
Thank you. Megan Kraft is commenting actually from the US. This is a wonderful program. How do you identify new partners? Here in Montana, we partner with a program to provide financial literacy to refugee families. However, a program such as this would be so helpful in providing different career opportunities. So the destinations, as you see, are varied.
Yeah, no, thank you for the question, Megan. For us, it's kind of, there's not a perfect science around how we develop our partnerships today. We have some, discussions with some of these big humanitarian actors, given that we want to, vision scale and, be able to deploy across a multiple range of geographic sites. But for example, we also have smaller organizations. For example, Refugee is mainly based in the Nairobi, the Kenya region. And so for us, what we have now, as we've try to continue work and improve our methodology working with partners, is certain lists of criteria that range from just the IT infrastructure on the ground, the HR capacity, ensure that we want to have someone who has those resources, has the time and the specific skill set to kind of impart our knowledge onto them, and that we're also in it for the long game. And so depending on the nature of the partnership, would be happy also maybe to talk further to this discussion. Maybe if Tom, you can share my kind of details, happy to talk with potential partners who are interested, but really it's kind of about the partnership, making sure that there are a basic set of criteria that are already responded to on the ground. And then we work to build, and part of it is also trying to figure out what level of customization we need to make the program on one hand efficient, but also allow for local adaptations based on language and other factors.
Very clear. And I think your thoroughness in your development of partnerships is really one of the secret aspects of what you're doing. I want you to speak a little bit to how you help these folks also gain access to the financial world, because we're speaking to banks here, values-based banks, and you've had some experience you described in France. And what would be the ways that people, because once they get money, and if they've not got an address, or if they have an address in the refugee camp, how does that work? How can we make them financial citizens as well?
Yeah, so I think, for example, if I take the partnership that we have with the Postal Bank in France, what they realize is that they are one of the banks to, in sense of your terms, to bank those who might not be able to meet other requirements to have an account. And so I think it's making it inclusive in the sense that if it might be a language barrier initially, or there might be just basic steps for them to understand and get, whether it's an application on their smartphone to be able to follow the steps. I think we try to figure out what are the other needs that they have. We work with a partner to figure out, what are the workshops that can we build. So for example, in this specific partnership, we do short workshops that can go up to half a day, just to learn kind of the nuts and bolts, the ins and outs of what they need to do to kind of sign up with their requirements, to kind of adapt it to their needs, and maybe, giving kind of a short workshop to go through the multiple steps. And so we try to work with things that already have those values. I know I'm speaking to a host of you guys today who have those, to think about how do we work to, for us, part of our work is to try to identify potential students on the ground who have those needs, and then to enroll in, these, for us, it's kind of the mix of financial and digital inclusion workshops that go through the basic things of opening an account, managing their account, and then, any support that they might need to, be autonomous as well. One of the hopes that we have behind Konexio is digital autonomy, which for us is super, super important, because we want to be able to have the students, not come back to us every day, because, we help them resolve one issue on their platform, checking the amount and, printing out their, their REIB in France, but then coming back to us for another issue. And so we also, in these workshops, trying to kind of train, instill a sense of autonomy and being able to find out the right information, for any other future questions they might have.
It's really interesting, because what you're extending into are life skills, we would say, right? So you start at one place, but in the end, you start to have to provide for many different needs in your work. Sonia Felipe has posted, "It's great to see how technology can help vulnerable people. At the same time, digitalization could become vulnerable to other people, like old people, or we can say elders. There's a hot debate in Spain, for example, about how digitalization is excluding old people in administration procedures, financial services, and things like this." I think everybody's trying to grow your company, Jean. And I maybe just to say, I think not all governments in certain countries see the freelance market is necessarily good for their countries as well. So I'm wondering how you are working through this labyrinth, and maybe your thoughts about Sonia's question.
Yeah, no, that's a good question, and I think it adds to the complexities. I think our mission at the end of the day stays the same, and we want to upskill and get our students included in the digital era, just given the range of things, as Sonia is alluding to, there are a question of access to rights. When we start with, whether in France, I think it's very similar, your unemployment insurance, your social welfare, everything passes online. And that was a huge crunch for our students at the start of the COVID crisis. We had nearly more than 50% of our students who are not, they don't have either the good connection or they don't have the equipment. And so I think there's certain pockets of the population that are just very much excluded. And so I think it's a complicated question in the sense that we see, also as a responsibility of maybe government actors and public actors. If, we're going through this rapid digitalization, there needs to be some form of support for those who are more, clearly to be left behind in that kind of digitalization. The French tech minister in France actually formerly said kind of this whole digitalization is kind of like a high-speed train. If you're not, it's already left the station, and if you're not on it, you're just going to be further behind. And so I think the question for a lot of these countries, I think, kind of anywhere in the world, is how do we make sure people are not left behind? I personally think there is a government, and we have an advocacy role specifically in France where we work to make sure that digital inclusion is a basic right to inclusion as others, because now, it's kind of the digital in terms of what we're talking about is the new language of our century. And if people are not included in that, they face social, economic exclusion in a wide range of, different aspects. And so I think the long answer to that, maybe, and sorry to kind of go more in detail, is we do think there is maybe a good public actor role if we're going increasingly towards digitalizing this, that they need to have some sort of support or anticipation, or else there will be individuals who will be completely cut off. And on the other hand, how can they work more closely in kind of PPP, like private-public partnership relationships with organizations like us, other organizations as well, to accompany kind of support these individuals who will be facing otherwise pretty severe consequences as a result of digital exclusion. And I think within that, obviously with Konexio, we have a clear bias for kind of the professional aspects of life. If we're looking at some of the trends, 86% of all kind of job seeking steps, applying online, doing interviews, all of that passes online today. So they're huge barriers if we don't have those skills. But I think, as Sonia rightly said, a lot of that also applies to just basic aspects of practical life, especially if you have a lot of your government services that are being completely digitalized.
Yep. So this is making what we've heard for many, many years starting to happen in the, digital natives, digital divide, the challenges that are cropping up, and it feels like you are providing some solutions to that. In fact, Pariman Pakurel, hello Pariman, said, excellent contribution by Konexio, not only the refugees, but in a developing country where unemployment is a big problem. The role of Konexio, everybody's trying to grow your business, I see, can be indeed tremendous for promoting self-employment through digital freelancers. So he's just putting in a big vote for yes and keep expanding into different areas. Are you considering this, that basically beyond your core focus on refugees, that in fact this digital divide question continues to be a big issue in many countries, and also that providing opportunities for wealth creation through freelancing work can apply in many, many places?
Yeah, no, definitely. And maybe to speak to the question of who and target beneficiaries we work with. Obviously, given my personal research and the work I did with migrant refugee populations, we started working there, given we could adapt and we knew their pain points and how to resolve some of those. But given the huge kind of segments of the population, Sonia is referring to more elderly citizens. I think there's no maybe, and as we see it on the ground, no one age. And it's interesting when we talk about also the age range, because we actually work with a lot of youth on the ground who have maybe very quick, they are able to master social media. But when we ask them to do more professionalized tasks in some of the programs we work with, they're not able to have the mix of social codes and technical skills, to update their CV, to send a formal email. And those are huge kind of also pain points or obstacles to really gaining, this access to work. And so I think there's no maybe specific age gender kind of even profile or, nationality. So we work depending, on the work with our local partners in Jordan. We have a really nice mix of newcomers, but also local youth who also need, who are unemployed and who have these, huge potential for upskilling and being able to be part of the global, digital economy. And so in that sense, we also want to find a local, partner on the ground who they have that context, they know where the deepest needs are and how we work with them. So to answer that question, we do, we started working and we know how to adapt our pedagogy, some of the most vulnerable. And also, we've extended and have more kind of varied target groups with which we work with.
That concludes our session today, Jean. I just want to say what a fantastic story. Beautiful that you can explain it in such a clear and concise way. We really see your business model. I think there are many, many banks in our population who would be interested in working with you or working with partners on the ground that you work with. I really like that, by the way, that you work with partners on the ground and continue to develop those partners as well. And that you've taken the time to explain to us what it is that you do and how you make your business model work. What a pleasure. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much, Tom, and thank you for this opportunity. It was great to speak with you, and I would be happy, to follow up if there are more questions to see what potential opportunities there are for collaboration.
Wonderful. Until soon, take care. That is the conclusion of this session. We will now take a 15-minute break, and we have a very exciting session coming up with Kamal Kadir on Bikash. And I'll leave you with a quiz question for all of you. What does Bikash mean in Bangla? It may be surprising. So see you in 15 minutes.